Hi, welcome to another episode of the Financial Freedom Podcast. I'm Steve Richardson, a bankruptcy attorney trying to keep people on their path to financial stability and independence through education. As a bankruptcy attorney, I help lots of people save their homes from foreclosure by filing a Chapter 13 bankruptcy to make catch up payments on their mortgage. But there are other ways to do it. That's why in this episode of the podcast, I talked to DJ Olojo about how he helps people to save their homes without filing bankruptcy. My guest today is DJ Olojo, an experienced real estate investor, podcast host, and managing director of ASO Custom Homes LLC. With more than 15 years of real estate investing under his belt, he's become a go to expert on the ins and outs of foreclosure. DJ has a mission to help 1 million homeowners successfully navigate foreclosure. His experience on all sides of the real estate investment process gives him unparalleled insight into what all the parties may be looking for when it comes to foreclosure. His podcast, The Foreclosure Fix, gives homeowners practical advice, actionable tips, and a comprehensive understanding of the foreclosure landscape with an eye on finding hope in adversity and regaining financial footing. Welcome to the show, DJ.
Thank you so much for having me, Stephen. How are you doing today?
Doing well for a Friday. We're all recording here on Friday in the Ides of March. But before we started recording, I was telling you that as folks that listen to the podcast know, I'm a bankruptcy attorney, and I have information on my website about foreclosure, but mainly to attract people that need to deal with a foreclosure. And my solution has really been a Chapter 13 bankruptcy, where you keep the mortgage company from foreclosing on your home and taking it, while having the breathing room to make payments into a plan that get you caught up and you cure the breach. But it would be awesome if there was a non-bankruptcy solution that people can avail themselves of that avoids having to file a bankruptcy where it might hurt their credit even further. So that's why I wanted to talk to you. So
Well,
go ahead.
I'm grateful to be on your podcast, and I definitely think you got the right guy to talk through some of those things. But anytime I'm talking with an attorney, I'm always a little bit leery because it's like, hey, you guys know more than I do, right? So it's like, but being someone who has worked on all sides of both foreclosure as a
Mm-hmm,
lender, right, and also as an agent helping people who are dealing with foreclosure, but then
mm-hmm.
also as the investor who has purchased foreclosed properties, it's very interesting that a lot of people just don't know that they have options when they are facing those type of legal situations. And you mentioned bankruptcy, which is a really good option for many people when they face foreclosure, but along the way and along the process, especially depending on what type of state you're in, whether it's a judicial or non-judicial state, depending on the foreclosure timeline, there are numerous things that you can do before you get to that whole bankruptcy piece. And a lot of those things revolve around communication with your lender
Mm-hmm.
and the proactive state steps that you as a homeowner want to take in order to remedy the situation.
Well,
And
let's
so,
let's start at the beginning here, and we'll walk through it. I mean, and you say judicial, non-judicial states. You make a good point to, as far as our listeners out there who may not be in New Jersey. New Jersey is a judicial state where you actually bring a foreclosure complaint. There's foreclosure legislation that guides the process, whereas other states it might be a lot quicker. But you get one of these foreclosure complaints, or some sort of notice that they're foreclosing on your home, trying to take it. It's a very intimidating process, and you face the loss of your home. And then, of course, it drives you to the internet. You start Googling around, you start reading all sorts of things about foreclosure. And I'm sure there are a lot of myths out there about the foreclosure process. I was wondering if you could bust a few of them for us today.
well, there are tons of myths, and with the internet, every day a new myth is created. And so I think the first myth and the myth that I hear the most is that the bank just wants my house, right? That is what I hear so commonly from homeowners who are facing foreclosure, is that I've done nothing wrong and the bank just wants my house because this neighborhood is being gentrified or property values have increased or whatever else may be the case. And what I always like to tell people is that the bank doesn't want your house. They can and will take your house if you don't pay them, but what they really want is your money, right? And if you pay them, they will happily take the money, because houses are difficult, houses are confusing, and no two houses are the same. And they like simple things. Bankers are simple people. They like simple things, and green, which is money, is always simple, right? And so that's what they want. And so that's the first myth that I want to bust for everybody, is that they don't want your house. The next thing I want to say is that a lot of people believe that once they receive paperwork that says you are facing foreclosure, so the demand letter or the Liz pendants or whatever else may be the case that says you are now in active foreclosure, they believe that at that moment the bank owns their property now and that they are done, that they've lost it. And that is not the case. When you receive documentation or you just say, I'm leaving my house and it's done, that does not mean the bank automatically owns your house. The bank does not own your house until they complete the foreclosure process, which in most states ends in a sheriff's sale or a sale on a courthouse steps of some sort. And so until that process is completed, you are still the owner of your property. And until you are no longer the owner of your property, you still have remedies to the foreclosure situation. One of those being bankruptcy, but there are also other things you can do along the way. And so that's the next myth I want to bust, is that you still own your house until the title changes via either a legal process or you sell it. The last thing I want to bust is the notion of I'm too late. And that notion of I don't have enough time to do anything, or it's only, 7 days before the foreclosure sale, there's nothing I can do, they just have to take my house. There's always one option left up until the day of the foreclosure sale, and that's bankruptcy. And if you file bankruptcy, then you automatically halt the foreclosure action. And so there's always an option or a remedy. Now, bankruptcy may not be the option that you want to pursue, but there's always an option if you really, really want to save your home. And so those are the biggest myths that I see just dealing with homeowners who are facing foreclosure on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I just want to mention to the listeners too, and I'm sure that you want to clarify, and I think you said earlier before we hit record, you're not an attorney. You described the foreclosure process in several states and when it's too late and things like that. Just that our listeners should be aware, you're not an attorney. This isn't legal advice, but it does give you a good idea of what solutions may be available to you, outside of the foreclosure process. And I can certainly say that your comment about bankruptcy, if as long as it has to be a Chapter 13 bankruptcy and with a repayment plan, but as long as it's filed before the sheriff's sale, at least here in New Jersey, you still have a chance to back away from the cliff. There's still some time. It's not too late.
Stephen, thank you so much for clarifying that. And yes, I am not an attorney. I do not play one on TV. If you do need a good one, I know one. His name is Stephen Richardson, and he's happy to help you. Right. So,
right. So, all right. So we busted a few myths, and just folks, no matter what you may read on the internet and doing your research, make sure that you're at the very least looking at some authoritative sources. It should be an attorney's website and an attorney who's experienced in this area and knowledgeable, or a court website that might give you information, something authoritative. But don't believe necessarily everything you read out there. Talk to an expert, talk to an attorney, talk to someone that might be able to give you some other options. Now, speaking of other options, you want to try and, there may be some negotiation options with the bank. Like I said, they don't want your house, they want your money. And knowing in advance what the other side's going to do, what their strategy is, can certainly help in negotiations. Can you tell us a little bit about the mortgage bank's playbook, what they're looking for, what their guidelines are, so to help people in negotiating with the bank to keep their home?
So the first thing I will say is that the size of the bank and the type of loan you have matter when it comes to negotiation. So, for example, if you're dealing with a big bank like Bank of America or something like that, and you have a FHA loan, right? Bank of America is a big bank. They're going to have systematized processes across the board. So they can't treat you different than they treat any other person. But also, if it's a FHA loan, the federal government mandates that you have different type of programs for that loan when you're facing foreclosure. And so if you have a FHA loan with Bank of America, your process is going to look the same, right?
Mm.
Versus if you're dealing with a smaller bank that's like a local community bank or even a small hedge fund that just buys notes or something like that, and your note is a regular, just conventional mortgage or it was a HELOC or something like that. The options that you have with that type of situation may look very different than the ones you have with the Bank of America. So you need to always keep in mind that the type of loan you have and the size of the bank do make a big difference in the type of conversations you'll be able to have. The next thing I'll say is you need to understand that having open, honest, candid communication with your loan servicer is always going to be the best route for getting a solution. So if you know that you have faced a severe situation and you were out of work for a year, but now you are working again, you need to make sure you present that. You need to show them this was the hardship that happened. I'm now through that hardship, and this is how I can move forward and make my monthly payment as agreed. And so, the way that typically works with most servicers is that they'll want you to fill out some type of hardship package, right? And
Mhm.
in that package, it's going to ask you for a lot of details, how much money you have, how much, what's your income, very similar to what you ask if you're filing for bankruptcy, right? What type
Mhm.
of debts you have, what's your liabilities, and things like that. And by filling that out, it gives your servicer a picture of your financial situation and your ability to repay. And in those scenarios, there's a few things that can typically happen. One, they'll come back and say, unfortunately, we can't adjust your loan. You need to find a way to pay us the money. Number two, they could modify your loan, which is basically they are creating a new agreement with you and changing your loan terms and saying that maybe you can start paying less at a different interest rate to help you through this storm. Or they may take the arrears, right, which is all the payments they've made on your behalf, all the late penalties and stuff like that, and say, okay, we'll give you a fresh start. We're going to just tack this on to the back of the loan, right? And it's going to be due when you sell the house or when you pay off the loan. Or they may say, you may need to go out and refinance, right? So there's lots of different options. But by going through that process and having open and honest communication, it lets the bank know that you are serious about keeping your investment. And the worst thing you can do is stick your head in the sand and act like this is not going on, not happening, and not come up with any type of solutions in order to move forward.
Now, a couple things to bear in mind. Of course, the sooner you do this, the better. So, if you get a notice of intent to foreclose, which is usually the shot across the bow from the mortgage company, that's when you need to reach out to them immediately and start talking to them. The sooner you do that, the better, right? Uh,
Absolutely.
Also, just to bear in mind too, with solutions, I know at least under New Jersey law and foreclosure law, once they file that notice of intent to foreclose, they can't take a partial payment. So say, look, can I make a payment this month, or can I make a payment and a half? They're kind of stuck under what's called an election of remedies rule that says we can either foreclose or we can accept full payment at once of the amount that you're behind. So unfortunately, that can, under those circumstances, limit what you can do, to more of a modification or a refinance or a balloon at the end of the loan of the other things that you described. Now, the process you described, you said it can be different for a large bank or a small bank. That procedure that you described, is that across the board? Is that just small banks, or is that just large banks, or is there a difference?
Yeah, so every servicer has a process to deal with delinquent loans, right? That process has different nuances and quirks depending on the servicer, but every servicer has a process to deal with delinquent loans. And you need to go into the process being open, being transparent, and working to get a resolution. The
Mm-hmm.
other thing that you said that I think is really important that we highlight is the timing of your communication matters. You said that shot across the bow when they send you that demand letter, right? Is if you start communicating with them right away, not only does that help you from a time perspective and a positioning perspective and a strategy perspective,
Mm-hmm.
but it also saves you a ton of money because the longer this goes on, the more work attorneys have to do, and the more time that passes, the greater your bill is. And in numerous states across the country, and I know New Jersey is one of those, foreclosure fees or many foreclosure fees are reimbursable. So if you go and rack up a $15,000 bill because you're fighting a foreclosure and it's contested, and the judge finds in the favor of the lender, which most likely they will do if as long as it's a true and legitimate mortgage, and they have the chain of title, the note, the allonge, and everything else, then you have just racked up a bill for no reason. And what I always like to tell people is that if you took out the loan and you agreed to those payments, then that is a contract you made with somebody, and you're obligated to fulfill that contract or work to modify that contract.
Mm-hmm. And a couple points. One, you said about you rack up an additional bill. Uh, if you start right at uh, the shot across the bow, the notice of intent to foreclose, and you are able to either work something out, or if you can't, file the Chapter 13 bankruptcy as soon as you can, then uh, what happens if you file the bankruptcy? Then the bank is going to file a document called a proof of claim. This is how much you owe us. Now, if they haven't sent it to a lawyer yet, if they haven't brought a foreclosure complaint, then it's principal, interest, late fees, things like that. But if you wait ultimately until just before sheriff's sale, there's all sorts of attorneys fees, filing fees, additionally accrued interest, things like that. So the sooner you act, not only the better for you in showing that you're serious about resolving the problem, but also the less you'll have to pay. And also, you mentioned a servicer, and I want to clarify that for our listeners, because the servicer is not necessarily and usually isn't the bank, right? The bank lends the money, they get that mortgage loan, and then they hire a company to service the loan, accept the payments, process them, do the billing, that sort of thing. So we've talked about big banks versus small banks. Well, we're also talking about different servicers and how maybe some of their procedures are different, right?
Absolutely. And that's the thing is a big servicer like a Mr. Cooper or something like that
Uh-huh.
versus a smaller servicer like an Allied Loan Servicing or a FCI or something like that. Their processes are different, and each servicer, each bank, each entity has their own different processes.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a first mortgage and a second mortgage, and there were two different servicers, and you're delinquent on both of them, they're all going to have different types of hoops you may have to jump through. And so, what I always tell people is that you need to give yourself enough time to
Mm-hmm.
understand the processes, but then also to be able to get the results that you want. Like you need to allow yourself enough time to fill out the paperwork and make the phone calls and do all those things that you need to do when you're facing foreclosure to get a resolution that's positive.
Right. Absolutely. So, anything else with the mortgage bank or servicers playbook that our listeners should know as far as what they need to negotiate, or what they're looking for, what the banks are looking for?
The banks never typically want your house, right? And so the
Right.
banks are always looking to try to get that money back. And so what I always like to tell people is that you need to think creatively. You
Mm-hmm.
can't just have a one track mind. What can you sell? What grant programs are out there? What federal programs are out there? Are there still COVID dollars out there, which we still see in lots of different places? Can I use some of my retirement funds? Can I tap a 401k? Can I ask friends? Can I ask family? You have to think creatively because one, this is your house, this is the place where you stay, and this is the roof over your head. But the other part of the scenario is if you know that the bank just wants the money and they're
Mhm.
willing to negotiate or modify or do something creative, you
Mhm.
have to also be willing to do something creative and step outside your comfort zone to get back in good and right standing with the bank.
Mhm.
The next thing I was also like to point out for folks is that if you're facing foreclosure and you are older, right, and you're in that age where you can start collecting Social Security, right,
Right.
there are options available like reverse mortgages and things like that, where instead of having to make a monthly payment, you could take out a reverse mortgage, pay off your existing loan, and then not have a payment and let your heirs deal with the property when you are no longer here, right? And so
Mhm.
there are creative options like that that people just don't think about when they're facing financial pressures. And
Mhm.
so you have to really think outside the box and try to come up with creative solutions that work for you and your lender when you find yourself in those scenarios.
Mhm. And certainly, if you're a lot of the folks I talk to when they come to me, usually the bad times are behind them. One of the first questions I ask, and really a requirement of any kind of Chapter 13 bankruptcy, is that you can make next month's mortgage payment. Because when you go into the payment plan, you're not only paying something towards the arrearage to get it caught up, but you got to pay the current mortgage payment as it falls due every month. So, usually there's some sort of triggering event, a loss of a job, a illness, that sort of thing, or a drop in income that is temporary, that is no longer there, and certainly emphasizing that early on, that this is an ongoing. The bad times are over. I can get back on track again. Certainly helps.
It definitely does. And I think that people think that filing bankruptcy is a bad thing or things like that. Filing bankruptcy is actually a very beneficial thing for many homeowners.
Hmm.
And I think that that is one of the options as someone who gets no benefit from it whatsoever, because I don't practice law, so I can't
Yeah.
do it for them, right? I encourage people to do it when it makes sense for their situation. And the reason is because one, you get a transparent look at that borrower if you're the lender. And the borrower is now in a situation where they can repay. And if they can repay faster, there are options available to do that. But it allows all the creditors to kind of stop and them to kind of be able to smell the roses and say, okay, I have a pause on this. And so now I can figure out the best plan. And it's a really beneficial process that can help homeowners who are underwater, and
Mhm.
people rebound from that and they are much more successful. They can buy houses in the future if they end up losing their house, for any unbeknownst reason, and they just get rid of some of the extra baggage, especially like medical debt or stuff like that in different scenarios. And so it's very, very helpful process for a lot of folks.
Yeah. All right, so let's go step back a little bit further in time, to before the notice of intent to foreclose gets sent to you. You've missed a mortgage payment, and you're concerned about making the next mortgage payment, uh, and keeping foreclosure from happening in the first place is really even better, if you can do that. Do you have some foreclosure prevention tactics that you can tell us about that might uh, keep people from being foreclosed upon in the first place?
Yep. The first thing that people want to do is, if you know you're going to miss a payment on your mortgage,
Mhm.
is communicate it to your servicer. Think about any relationship that you have. Communication is key, right?
Mhm.
And when you communicate proactively, it makes the ramifications a lot better for all parties. The bank knows that you're going to be late, they're okay with it, and you have set an expectation or a plan as to when you're going to pay. So the first thing you can do is just communicate, communicate, communicate. That is the first thing to do. The next thing you need to do, depending on how long you think that this situation is going to last for, if you think it's just like a one-time thing, maybe you got laid off and now you're working again, or you had a help situation, or God forbid you got divorced or something like that. Communicate all those things of how long you think this hardship is going to last, because sometimes the bank will give you a forbearance where they'll say, hey, don't make payments for a couple months and then start making your next payment in a few months, or they'll note the file so that way they won't start foreclosure because you told them that you are going to be able to either catch up the payment or you're going to be able to make your payments in a few months. And so that's very, very important. But the other part about that is looking internally and saying, why am I late on these payments? Because if you didn't have a financial hardship, if you didn't have a health issue, if you didn't get divorced, if you didn't have, things like that you couldn't control, is it a budgeting problem? Is it just you have more going out than you have coming in? Do you need to get a different job? Do you need to get a second job? Do you need to find a way to refinance and get into a lower payment? Do you need to potentially even sell your house? And so the other part about avoiding foreclosure is asking yourself those difficult questions of why am I in this situation in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
And looking internally to say, what have I done to get me here and how can I get out of it? And so I always recommend that people do a quick kind of 5-minute personal financial statement. And that's basically where, for those of you who don't know what a personal financial statement is, it's basically where you see kind of what your net worth is. And so on one side of the paper, you'll write all your assets, your house, your cars, how much money you have in the bank, stocks, 401k, whatever else may be the case. And then on the other side, you write all your liabilities, the note or mortgage against your property, the car note that you may have, and the balance there, any credit card debt and things like that, and look and see if you have more assets than you have liabilities. If you find yourself in that situation where you have more assets, then you may need to say, how do I restructure my assets to get the money out to pay for my foreclosure situation? And so sometimes it's just taking a step back from the day to day and thinking a little bit more high level to say, how can I deal with the things that are most important? The last thing I'll say is that if you're facing numerous different types of debt, you need to prioritize your debt into the debts that are recourse and the debts that have less recourse, right? And the debts that are non-recourse. And so what I always think about recourse is not only is the hit to your financial, your credit score, but also at what priority are these debts in the capital stack of your life, if that makes sense. Right. And so, for example, I would say, a mortgage is significantly higher, right, than maybe a credit card bill, because, one may add up and be a higher interest rate, but one of them controls the roof over your head. And so I think sometimes you need to go through that process to say, if I have to be late on something, which one do I choose to be late on?
Exactly. People, you want to make sure that, I talk to folks all the time. They'll tell me what their debt situation is. And, what got you into trouble? Was it credit card debt? Was it medical bills? Was it, personal loans? To get an idea. And a lot of times they are current on the mortgage. They're just behind on this other stuff. And I'm like, well, good for you. You maintained your priorities and made sure that, your taxes got paid, the mortgage got paid, the car loan got paid, so you don't lose your house, your home, or your livelihood. So yes, it's certainly important to prioritize that. And sometimes, you may be able to use like a Chapter 7 strategically to get rid of all the other debt, and then once that's gone, you can afford to uh, make the mortgage payment, and maybe use strategically a Chapter 7 to keep you out of trouble if you do it early enough, that allow you to afford that mortgage payment.
Yeah. One thing I'll ask you, Stephen, and you probably see this a lot, is when we intake for homeowners who are doing a modification, and this is when we're the lender on the property. But we look through their credit card statements sometimes, and we look through their bank statements, and it's amazing how much money can get siphoned out on things that people don't realize are non-needed expenses. We had a borrower one time where when you look through their credit card statement and you look through their bank statements, they were spending hundreds, if not thousands of dollars a month on eating out and subscription services.
Wow.
And if you're in a situation where you would just eat out a little bit less and you would cancel some of those subscription services, you could then pay your mortgage, which was, maybe only $800 or something like that. And so I think sometimes people have the financial capacity to make the payments, but they're prioritizing other things to their detriment sometimes.
Or they may not even be aware of it if they're not tracking it.
Exactly.
If you're not disciplined in your spending, you have no idea. And a lot of times I see that light bulb go on over the heads of my clients where they say, "Oh my Lord, until I did your budget sheet, I had no idea we were spending that much on X." And once you realize that you're doing that, it's like the best first step to solving a problem is knowing you have one. So you know you're spending over $1,000 a month. Oh my God, to go out to dinner. Well, you can certainly stop that. So that's an easier thing. And certainly in my experience, if the mortgage company, you can be in the middle of foreclosure and it's been to an attorney and they're foreclosing on your home, and you're in discussions with the mortgage company. A lot of times they'll instruct the attorneys to hold off, saying we're talking to the borrower. Hang on, don't do anything until we get back to you, and that can stop the clock for you.
That definitely works, and that's definitely true. Again, the bank doesn't want your house, but
Mhm.
sometimes they need to send you a wake up call. They need to get your attention. And the way they do that is by proceeding with the foreclosure process.
Mhm. So I see on your foreclosure fix and your materials and everything that you like other organizations have a 12-step program uh, to save a home. You probably already discussed some of the steps, but could you walk us through those steps so that people are aware of them?
Yes. So my new book called The Foreclosure Fix: 12 Proven Steps to Beat the Bank, Escape Foreclosure, and Turn Your Property into a Profitable Asset is out and can be ordered or purchased wherever books are sold. You can also get the audio book of it. But basically, the 12-step process that I walk through is a process that allows a homeowner to put themselves in the best possible position to profit from foreclosure.
Mhm.
And we talked about a lot of the steps at a high level, but we really go down into great detail in how you do that. And the first thing that we always tell people to do is that they need to reinvent their mindset. I think a lot of times when people face foreclosure, they put their head in the sand. They think that it's only me facing foreclosure and things like that, not realizing that, most Americans, right? Over 60% of Americans say, that they are just a couple paychecks away from, being broke, right? And so it's not just you facing that situation. It could be your neighbor, it could be, your daughter or your son's school teacher. Everybody has financial pressures. And so just saying you got to reinvent your mindset and stop saying woe is me and start getting to the mindset of how do I get a solution to this problem. The
Mhm.
next thing we ask people to do is to become seasonally selfish. And seasonally selfish is just basically saying, I'm going to take a step back and kind of focus on me. Because what we found in our experiences is that the person facing foreclosure often is helping other people, right? They're the one who people always come to when they have problems and things like that. And they're the one always helping other folks out. But we say take a step back and say, you need to help, become seasonally selfish. Our next step is to really understand the bank's lingo and process and motivation. Just as we talked about, the bank doesn't want your house. So, how do you begin to understand what they want and then position your solution to what they want versus what you think they want? All right. Then evaluating your financial position, right? I want you to look at your financial position and say, do I have excess or do I have kind of scarcity? And how do you make a decision on what to do from there? The next piece would be identifying your property's condition and value. It's surprising that a lot of people don't really know what the value of their property is worth or how the condition is. And obviously, with apps like Zillow or Realtor.com and things like that, you can find out the value, but the condition is something that could be subjective. And so, really understanding, are you in a position where you have a lot of equity in your property, or are you in a position where you have negative equity and you may need to revert to doing a short sale or something else that may be a little bit more strategic or creative? All right. The next thing is just helping people understand that if you're facing foreclosure, you are a target, right? You're a fat, juicy target, and how to avoid scams and things like that. Um, the next step in our process is really helping people understand that they need to make a decision. And that decision is if you're going to keep your house or if you're going to let it go. So you've gone through that process of understanding all about foreclosure and understanding the equity you have in your process, your property. But are you going to keep that house or are you going to let it go? And so that's the next step. And because you can't do both things at the same time, right? You have to take a path and go down that path. The next step is I always encourage people to attempt to keep their homes, right? So when it makes sense, I want you to keep your home because we know that people who own homes have a significantly higher net worth over time. And so my goal is to create and help more people keep their home. But that's not always the best option for folks. And so that is the next step. But if it doesn't work for you, you keep moving forward, right? Mm-hmm. The next thing is know thyself and thy buyers, right? So if you're going to sell your home, you need to know yourself and know your potential buyers. So who are the type of folks who will buy your property and how can you maximize that dollar amount? Next will be pick your preferred profit strategy, right? So you're going through and saying, I'm going to sell my house, right? Or I'm going to keep my house. How do I profit if I do either of those options? What things can I do? Then you got to master the sales process. And if you're not great at sales or you don't understand what the real estate sales process is, don't worry because there are people out there who can help you. And that last step is really just about expecting the best, but preparing for the worst. So you want to expect that all these great things are going to happen, but you want to prepare yourself for what can happen if things don't go the way you expect them. And so that's our 12-step process in a nutshell. But the goal of the Foreclosure Fix program is to really just help homeowners understand that you have options when you face foreclosure. And don't just let the foreclosure bus run you over, but put up a big stop sign and say, hey, you're stopping right here, right? And I'm getting off this train, right? And so that is our goal for homeowners. And we're just excited to try to help 1 million homeowners keep their homes.
Well, that's great. And a lot of things that for people to consider and think about. Some good advice. If people want to reach out to you, either get your book or have you help them with the foreclosure process, how can they reach out?
You can find us at www.theforeclosurefix.com. You can send us an email at help@theforeclosurefix. You can find the book anywhere books are sold, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, whatever other sites that are out there. And you can find me on social media at DJ_Olojo. That's how I'm on all social media. You can also check out our podcast, The Foreclosure Fix, for more information, more tips, more strategies. And what I always tell folks is that you have so many resources available to you. Help from the federal government is free. You have people like Stephen who will give you a consultation, who can tell you your options. And so the biggest thing you need to do is to go out and have conversations with competent professionals who have your best interest at heart. And if you go do that and you have those conversations, you will walk away feeling lighter, knowing your options and your solutions, and in a much better financial and mental space.
All right. Well, like I said, great information, folks, and I'll put those resources in the show notes so you don't have to be writing them down, and maybe a link to the book on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, so you can just click through and buy it. And thanks for being on the show, DJ, and telling us, there are more ways to save your home from foreclosure than Chapter 13 bankruptcy.
No problem. Thank you again for having me. And if you're listening to this podcast and you have not liked or subscribed this podcast, please do us a favor. Go ahead and hit that 5 like button, smash it, subscribe. This man is out here giving you great content. So make sure you don't miss another episode of it. Thank you so much for having me on, man. I appreciate you.
All right.